Happy to be co-hosting this with this exciting session on compliance, which I know is not everybody's favorite, but I actually really like it. So what we wanted to do is go through, with our friends at Big BizTech, go through and talk about what exactly is going on with compliance nowadays, right? Every business at one level or another is or will be required to have some kind of compliance requirement. And, what does that really mean in English? So that's what we're going to be doing. My name is Ron Searle. I am the lead CISO at Business Cybersecurity Solutions. What a CISO does, Chief Information Security Officers, we translate the technical requirements of compliance, regulations, laws, etc., into language that typically C-level people and below can understand. Um, so what we're doing is we're going to talk about how we maybe understand what some of the terms are and how do we go ahead and, adapt to this new reality of our world. So first of all, we're going to hit just kind of like what is causing all of these things to suddenly be placed upon us. We're going to talk about AI. That is like all the buzz. There's regulations around that too and compliance. So we're going to talk a little bit about AI and how that impacts you and your business, especially as people are trying to think about ways to utilize it to accelerate what you do. We're going to talk about the triggers. So what are those things that I need to watch for, which might cause me to have to comply? So, for example, if you didn't used to accept credit cards, suddenly you do accept credit cards. You might have to comply with PCI, and you might make a decision that says, I'm not going to do that, or I'm going to do it differently. We're going to talk about different frameworks. You're going to get a copy of this deck afterwards, so you do not have to take notes. You do not have to remember them, and I swear there's no quiz on all of this alphabet soup because you can see there's a lot. What is it? What does compliance require from your business? Like, no nonsense. What do we have to actually do to comply? And most importantly, how do we get started? Um, what should we do after this seminar? Now, a managed service provider, like BizTech, is going to be someone who is probably doing a lot of the stuff for you. And if they're not already aware of what your requirements are, then they can be guiding you on that and they can be helping you fulfill any compliance needs you might have. So it's a conversation to have with your technology partner. Um, so diving right in, the new reality here is that we're getting pressure from 6 different sources, like all at once. So like 5, 10 years ago, it might have been 2 or 3 sources. Now we're up to 6. It's crazy. First and foremost is a regulator, because of course our government knows better on how to do everything, right? So they put together these regulations. They're well intentioned, but they're new. And often they don't actually tell us. Like there are a lot of industries that they're like, say what? We are actually required to follow this. They didn't know. It's very common. So how do we kind of bridge that? Second is your cyber insurance company. If you don't have a cyber policy, you're already missing the boat here. You need to. And those cyber carriers, if you fill out that application with the worst information possible, your premium is going to be crazy. But if you do the right things, then their application is really the basics. If you do those right things, your premium is going to be the most controlled it could be. Additionally, your customers may be asking you. So if your customers are asking you, it's because your customers are probably facing 6 pressures themselves, and your customers want to improve their risk profile. So they don't want you to be a problem to them. It's that simple. They just want it to be clean. Investors, private equity, if you are thinking of selling, involved in selling or buying of companies, then this is a big deal. More and more, they're looking under the hood to make sure that they're not buying a risky investment. If you've got a board, and that by board, if you're a small business, might be husband and wife, right? Like there's some oversight of a company, and you really need to show the board that you're trying to do the right things and you are doing the right things. And then finally, and this is an emerging area, is banks and lenders. They know that if you're a big hot mess when it comes to cybersecurity, you're a risky investment. So more and more they're actually getting involved in the ask for, hey, are you, do you have certain controls in place, or are you SOC 2 Type 2 or whatever? It can have a material impact on whether you get a loan or what the cost of that loan is. I know one banker who was telling me that anybody who has SOC 2 Type 2, that is something that automatically gets them a 0.5% reduction in their lending cost because they know they're doing the right things. So that's pretty cool, unless you don't know about it, in which case you're just getting more expensive stuff. So we don't want that. All right, so the stakes. Oh my gosh. Average cost of big and large companies as of 2024, almost $5 million. Now in SMBs, it's often around $250,000 is kind of the minimum breach or ransomware costs. So it's kind of a big deal because there's all these rules now that say if you do have a breach, you got to do this, that, the other, and lawyers and forensics and blah, blah, blah. Like those costs add up fast. Hence, back to that insurance conversation, that having the insurance is just the cheap way to go. 60% of small businesses will close after 6 months, within 6 months of a breach, a major breach. Why is that? Because of those costs, because of the disruption, the reputation. Their customers are ticked off at them, their vendors are ticked off at them. Like everybody is angry at you because you just kind of messed up the food chain. And more and more, and this is the scariest statistic, 82% of claims are getting denied. So you have insurance, but your insurance is denied because you didn't do MFA. And that's like the most simple multi-factor authentication. It's like the simplest, easiest, usually doesn't cost anything. But if you don't do it, increasingly insurance companies are denying. I saw another statistic recently from last year, which said something like 53% of all cyber claims are being denied because people didn't fill out the survey right. They said they were doing cyber training, but they can't prove it. They said they were doing MFA, but they can't prove it. You got to be able to prove it. So if you say you're doing it, you have to prove you can do it. And honestly, if you're doing the things, there's a whole lot less likelihood you're even have a problem. So, and in the M&A world, Yahoo lost $350 million because they didn't disclose a breach that they had. Big money. All right, so AI, let's talk about that since everybody seems to be excited. There are now regulatory frameworks around the use of AI or the creation of AI. And so you got to decide where you fall. Most companies are users of AI, and only some people are creators within AI. If you're a creator, that's a bigger deal. It's a much easier process or conversation when you're just a user. But I want to say those lines are getting blurry. If any of you have used Claude Code, you're a creator. So you brought yourself over into the dark side. No, not really dark side, but you now have to comply with these rules that you probably have no idea they even existed, right? If you're just using Claude or ChatGPT to plug away stuff, that's one thing. But as soon as you start programming with it, it's a whole nother deal. So these laws are the earliest laws. Well, actually, I'm sorry. There's only one law, the EU AI Act. There are several states that are passing them, new AI rules. So there's not a uniform standard. The EU AI Act is probably the most mature, and it's actually pretty good. It's pretty solid. Now, the NIST AI Risk Management Framework and ISO 42001, these are voluntary, but they're the right thing to do if you find yourself as a creator. Now, if you're just a user, let's talk about responsible AI. It's important that you think about some of these key factors. Is your use of AI transparent? Do you create stuff and your customers think that you created it by hand or not? So if you're an accountant, that's a problem. You have a legal duty to be the one responsible for the output. If you are a marketing person, creating billboards or something, then there's less of a concern. But in more and more, it's a good idea to just let people know when AI has been used. Um, Human oversight, if you have certain high risk activities, like if I have AI running an x-ray machine and that x-ray machine hurts somebody, that's a big problem, right? That's unacceptable. So certain AI activities need human oversight and certain don't. If I doing the tax return, if I use AI to assist with the tax return, the tax preparation professional still has to look it over. But the idea is let's accelerate it. But if we are talking about responsible AI, we're going to be doing these 6 items. So I'm not going to get into all of them. Fairness and bias management is one that I want to talk about real quick because this is a huge topic in AI right now. Um, One notable example that has that landed through the and ran through the courts was in regards to an HR system. So all these resumes were being sent through the system. The system's AI was splitting them out, scoring them, deciding which ones to reject, and deciding which ones to move forward. The problem with that system was not that the system was bad. Um, the problem was the training data, and I'm going to oversimplify this. The training data was created based on a bunch of old white guys. And so when you put a minority female, suddenly the resume didn't look the same. And so it scored it poorly. And that was wrong. It wasn't wrong because it differentiated the groups. It was wrong because it wasn't really looking at the skills for the job, right? So you got to have some consideration and fairness as you're using your system, whether it's a resume system or an HR system or whatever, you have to realize that it might be biased and you really need to be careful depending on what the system is doing. So, the last thing is AI inventory management. So, the big question I ask everyone on this call is, do you know what AI systems are in use in your company? I bet you, even if you said yes, you're probably wrong. It is a huge problem right now. Shadow IT or shadow AI, if we want to call it that, is very prevalent. People are using free AI tools. Maybe your company uses Copilot from Microsoft, but somebody doesn't like it and they want to go use Notebook LLM or Claude or some other system. Well, as a company, you need to govern who's allowed to use what and what data and what can you use it for. So you need to have some AI governance. So right now, it's the wild, wild west. Now we do have those frameworks. We can do that. And that's something we can certainly help people with. What triggers your compliance? Really, it comes down to first and foremost your data, and secondly, who your customers are. Okay, from those two things, we can help do the secret to go to ring to figure out what compliance framework applies to you. Um, this is the most important one is what data you keep. So if I am working in an industry where I have a lot of consumer data, well, right there, consumer data is a regulated type. But also the customers that I serve. So I might have only business data. So number one, well, maybe it's not a big deal. But then I go to the customers, and the customers might require something more. I'll use Caterpillar as an example. In order to sell or work with Caterpillar in any way, you have to fill out their cybersecurity, assessment. And it's not small. So if you want to be a cleaning, you want to do facilities maintenance and cleaning for them, you still have to do this. So you don't have any data that's important, but you're serving a customer who has some kind of critical data, or they just have their own compliance needs for reasons. And it doesn't matter what the reasons are. All that matters is these are the people you're serving or you want to serve, right? You gotta keep those two in mind. So I provided a little chart. Again, I'm not gonna read it all, but a little way for you to quickly identify some of the common data types. So we talked about EPHI, protect electronic protected health info. There's also credit cards, debit cards, and stuff like that. That's falls under PCI. Um, if there's an application for a loan, that's another category. And then back to the consumer data. You heard me emphasize consumer several times because consumer data is protected in 26 states right now, soon to be about 35-ish, hopefully by the end of the year. Each of these states have their own laws. And here's the thing, it doesn't matter where you are based. It only matters where your customer is based. So if I have customers that are in California, even though I'm in Chicago, I still have to comply with the CCPA. If you remember back to the beginning, I said often we're not even notified that we have compliance rules that apply to us. This is a great example. This is called extraterritorial, which means it applies wherever that person is, and where I am, it doesn't matter. So extraterritorial has kind of become a new fad with the legislators because they just don't really care about the mechanics of this all. They just assume we'll all comply. Like, well, it's hard to know what to comply with if you don't know what you have to comply with. So anyway, there's others. If you do any manufacturing and federal contracts, there's CMMC, and we already talked about AI. So these are all big ones. Let's just talk about a few and what triggers them. Okay, that's a big thing. It's like if I have one EPHI record versus a million, is there any difference? So we'll start with HIPAA. Any electronic protected health info. So literally one record, one person's medical information in my system means that I'm supposed to comply with HIPAA. Now I'm going to take a step back and I'm going to just give you a little bit of my sage advice, which is if you don't have a lot of something like this, don't keep any of it. Find a way to put that somewhere else. So most businesses are not in the, medical business, but they might have health insurance applications, life insurance applications, information that is about a claim or short-term disability or long-term disability. These are things that regular companies might have in their systems. And what I would say is get it out of your system, go put it into like an HR system, like we use Paylocity. We don't keep any of those records in our system. We keep it inside Paylocity so that Paylocity has to comply with HIPAA. If you don't have it, you don't have to protect it. It's huge advice. If you don't have it, you don't have to protect it. But generally speaking, with HIPAA, the types of companies you're going to see is anybody that's in the healthcare industry, but also around the healthcare. So insurers, billing organizations like third-party billers, and IT vendors, because you can touch their info, right? So that's important that your MSP is able to properly, control and protect their systems, which, we do. That's not a problem. It's a very routine thing, but it is part of it. And there may be other vendors that are related to the healthcare. And again, it comes down to, I don't want to touch your data. I don't want to see your data. Don't even let me have access to see your data. right? As an IT provider, by the way, we don't have to see it. We can back it up. It can all be secure without actually viewing it. So there's some requirements that are around HIPAA. Then these are very similar from framework to framework. These are just certain things that need to be done. Um, and there are built-in mechanisms that are very well worn, well known, such as breach notifications. It's extremely lax, set 60 days. If we goof and we see some data, we need to report it. If you get ransomware, you have to report it. If you get whatever, you have to report it. Because this really helps people get better about this, like trying to avoid them. And by the way, some of the notification requirements nowadays are down to 72 hours, not 60 days. Penetration testing is not required for HIPAA, but most likely by the end of the year it will. So that's something that's going to be new. There's also some other improvements with, we're calling it HIPAA v2. And there are some pretty serious fines with HIPAA. OCR, Office of Civil Rights, they are ramping up their enforcement and they're collecting bank. I mean, bank, hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars in penalties because it's 50,000 per violation category. It's easy to rack up a big bill. And worse yet, if you're a HIPAA provider, you go on the wall of shame. That data is publicly listed that you got fined and why you got fined. So it's pretty ugly. PCI, on the other hand, that's all about credit cards. Credit cards, debit cards, that kind of stuff, gift cards. That is all the trigger. And so you see that a lot with retailers, restaurants, anybody who uses credit card. Um, now, that being said, same thing's going to apply. If you don't have the data, you don't have to protect it. With all PCI or credit card companies, we recommend, credit card using companies, I recommend that you have a third party process those things. You don't save the credit card. You instead have them go to a portal, they save it in the portal, and then that portal provider, like PayPal, Venmo, Stripe, there's lots of them, they're responsible for the PCI regulation because PCI is kind of a lot of work, especially for a little company. There's lots of requirements in there. Every version, when they update it, there's just more and more requirements. Pen testing is required, and there's some other evidence collecting. So it's not just a one and done. This is something that requires a regularity. And there is certification too, depending. You may have to pay an auditor to come in. And pretty big fines. And here's the fun thing. This one is not actually from the government. All the credit card companies got together lots of years ago and they're like, holy cow, if we don't get this under control, the government's going to step in and they're going to put some crazy rules in place. So we better get ourselves under control. And they did it. They did a good job and they keep improving it. So kudos to them. They have avoided formal government regulation so far, and they do a great job. FTC and GLBA, this is only relevant, well, mostly relevant to those in the financial product arena, like you're issuing a credit card, or you're loaning money. So loaning, leasing, so think car dealerships, think, check cashing places, money advance places, certain tax preparation companies will do that, like, or even your CPA. Your CPA might say, "Hey, you're going to get $1,000 back, but I'll advance you 900 instead." Well, that counts. In 2023, they really revamped the rules because, quite frankly, most of these organizations were completely blowing it off. They weren't doing anything at all. And I still have several car dealerships I deal with which fight me tooth and nail every year. Why do I need to do this? I don't want to do this. This is not important. I'm not loaning the money. The bank is. They're not loaning the money, but they are handling the application. They're in the middle. So the FTC says, too bad, so sad, you have to comply with this. And honestly, it's not that bad. But this program requires you actually have a designated CISO. You can't just have the secretary sign that, yeah, 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 we're doing the stuff. You have to have a CISO, qualified security individual, who signs off on that. And they are legally on the hook for the accuracy of that report. And I think that's what a lot of those companies hate, is they've now got to pay somebody to come in and say that they are compliant. The rules are not hard. Like there's some very basic requirements. Pen testing is required now. There's some other things, but it's not that hard. It really isn't. Big fines, civil penalties. I want to bring that up. Civil penalties could apply both to the organization and to in some cases, the individuals. What does that mean? That means if you lie and sign that form, you could get sued by the FTC. They could go after you personally. Hence the CISO thing, because we're used to it. So states are enforcing, and really the big risk, not only of the enforcement, is that it'll get out into the public and there's a loss of trust, right? If you're loaning money, you are supposedly in a position of trust, and this breaks that trust. CCPA and GDPR, this is the whole data privacy side of things. So it is related to cybersecurity. It's just a little different if you are collecting, selling, or processing personal data. And for California residents, that's CCPA. There's other states, but this is the most well-known. It's the most mature. GDPR is one you might have heard of. That is the same thing, but for European individuals. Who's affected? This is the one that is a real stinker. Pretty much everybody who's got a website or a newsletter or any kind of digital touch point. If you're collecting any data on those individuals, it counts. They go to a website, they put their name or they put their email, boom, you now have enough information that you have to comply. You've probably seen the annoying little banners that pop up on websites that say, we keep cookies and here's our privacy policy. This is why. These laws are why we have to do that now. We have to make it clear what data we're collecting and, what we're doing with the data that we collect. And there's all sorts of other rules I won't get into for sake of time, but there are some big fines. GDPR is the worst. It's up to 4% of global revenue or 20 million EU, whichever is bigger. These laws were created to punish Facebook and Google and Microsoft and all those big guys. Was not crafted for the little guys, but we are stuck living with it. So big fines, something to pay attention to. Manufacturing. So with manufacturing, there are a few things. First of all, the hot topic is CMMC. That is for federal contracts. There's 3 levels, whatever, but it all comes down to whether or not you have federal information. They call it FCI or CUI. But there's others. There's NIST, CSF, Cyber Security Framework, CSF, and there's ISO 27001. Both of those are optional. CMMC is not optional. If you want to work with the government, you're going to have to get it. But the others, if you get it, you can show off that you are a more mature company. Maybe you can get more jobs. HIPAA. One little side note on this is that they have a thing called an SRA, Security Risk Analysis, or Security Risk Assessment, depending on who you ask. These are annual. You got to do it every year. So if you're the one filling it out, you got to remember that if the OCR, Office of Civil Rights, comes and audits you, they're going to be looking at you to make sure that's filled out right. So definitely get a professional to help you out. especially the first time you do it, after the first time you do it, it'll go pretty quick. But that first one is, a little bit of work, but it's something that's very doable. Um, Fun fact, you don't have to fix everything you found that's broken. I wish they would do that, but they don't. The SRA is literally that. It is just saying all the things we're not doing right. The idea, I think, is to guilt everybody into doing the right thing and doing the work, but you don't actually have to. Obviously, if you have an SRA 1 year and it's worse the next year, you get audited. That does not look good. But that's all the requirement is. Just do it every year. So we kind of talked about the data types. I'm not going to rehash this one, so I have room for questions. But again, which framework applies to you comes down to the data. Let's talk about the insurance. We talked about it a little bit so far. There are 8 primary controls or things that the insurance carriers require. And I'm gonna tell you something. If the insurance company actually knows that these are good things to have, they really are good things to have. Like, they're not the brightest bunch. Like, they're just a bunch of accounting people, actuarial people figuring stuff out. But they've figured out that these 8 things will make a major difference in their claims. And that's all they care about. They just want to not pay out claims, right? So, you got to have MFA everywhere, managed EDR, not antivirus, not EDR, but managed EDR. So on and so forth. I'm not going to read them all, but these are the things that you're really going to need to do. And this list has evolved. Even a year or two ago, this list was like 4 or 5, and now it's really 8. And this is based off of applications we were seeing in 2025. So we talked about the claim denial, right? So the thing you got to remember is that each year the application is going to be a little different. And each year they're going to increase the requirements. So it's important to you to pay attention to what it says on there. Don't guess. And if something is on there that you're not doing, you really need to look at adding that to your plan, right? And it's usually adding those things to your plan are going to be way cheaper than the insurance increase if you don't do them. So each year it's a kind of an iterative process. And these are some examples of, you know, if you've misrepresented, you're going to get denied. If you have MFA, but you don't use it, or you use it most of the time, or you use it for most of the people, that's a no. You don't do it. As far as the insurance is concerned. And they definitely consider how good you are, cybersecurity stance, on the premiums. Could go up to an additional 50% cost for the premium. This is your 2026 checklist. So it's gotten bigger, but the insurance companies are bleeding out on claims. There is just an insane number of claims happening, and so they're just up in their game. So some new entrants like password vaults, dark web monitoring, so you know what of your old passwords have been breached. So some good stuff. I won't read it all, but the stance has changed. So in just 1 year actually, we have seen a pretty sharp increase. So I'll update this every year. It would not surprise me if in 2027 I had another couple items to add, because from what I've been hearing, the claims are continuing to come in and they're just getting bigger. These are some things. If you want to get ahead of the curve, if you want to be thinking, I want to get this in place before 2027 renewal, then these are some extra things that you can add. some stuff like DNS and web browsing protection. This keeps you from going to a bad website that's been breached, right? And going and maybe getting a virus. Central log management. Again, this is a relatively easy thing. It's required by a lot of compliance. And for the regular Joe Blow MS or SMB, it really wouldn't be a bad idea to go look at the stuff that the compliances are asking for, because that's your future. Whether or not you have it, doing those things really will help you position yourself for the minimum insurance increase. All right. What does it require? Like, if you have compliance needs, what do you got to do? All right. So, first of all, I wanted to kind of reiterate the chain. So, first, if you've got a customer who is regulated over here, then they're going to send you a survey because regulated customers have to do risk analysis on their customer, or sorry, their vendors. They want to make sure you're not a problem, which means you, the vendor, get that survey and you've got to respond favorably, or otherwise you're going to lose that customer. You're going to lose the contract. Now, quick story time. So this concept has been around for a very long time in cybersecurity, but one of the most dramatic examples in recent history was Target. So the Target stores, right? They had an HVAC problem at one of their stores. And so they hired a guy and they came out and they plugged their laptop into the switch so they could access the system, the building management system in the HVAC, because it's all computerized nowadays. Unbeknownst to the HVAC worker, his machine had already been compromised. And so when they plugged him into their network, what effectively happened is it gave the bad guys visibility and they stole millions of credit cards. So it had nothing to do with Target, although I would argue credit card data, HVAC data should not be anywhere near each other, but that's a whole other thing. But it was really the fact that this guy's laptop was breached. And so it cost Target a lot of money and long time to repair those relationships. And I can guarantee you their credit card processing fees with their banks were out of the roof, off the roof. I mean, they're just out of control. Like it's probably cost them in the hundreds of millions of dollars. Okay, so that's why this is important, is that you want to make sure your vendors are not going to become a problem for you. And these are the basic things you do for your vendors, like, do they have MFA? Um, do they do security testing and assessments or not? How do they manage their vendors, right? Because it can just keep flowing up, one vendor, your sub, and then to you. Do they have a plan in case there's a problem? And then what are they doing for their data? Do they encrypt it? Because it might be your data that you've given them to use. Is that data encrypted? Is it protected? How do you handle that? So there's some stuff you got to do. You don't need to remember all that, but the idea is that there is a process. It's a well-established process, but unfortunately, each of those questionnaires might be different depending on the vendor, or the customer. So it's something that you gotta work through, and that's one of the reasons that we have like a virtual CISO service that's available, so that if you get one of these and you don't know how to answer, you can just tap a professional who knows what they're looking for. There's some security testing that you should do, ideally before your customer asks you or before the regulators ask you. So these are three levels of rigor, I would say. So the first one down at the bottom is just this really basic scanning of your network, scanning of your Microsoft 365 tenant or G Suite, whatever you have. Just making sure those fundamentals are in place and doing it on a monthly basis. Why monthly? Well, if you're not a technical person, the reality is that every month there's new vulnerabilities being released. It's just a constant thing. And so if you're not checking regularly, it can be problematic. So I recommend every single company on the planet do this hygiene. Now, if you've got a higher requirement for compliance or you just want to do better, then we recommend a quarterly vulnerability scan. And this is where we look at everything on your network. We look for known vulnerabilities. And that's the key word, known vulnerabilities. And in doing that, it gives you a list of the things that we need to get corrected. And we do it quarterly because, well, we can do it continuously. Most places just do quarterly due to cost. But we do it so that you're regularly looking at it and then you've got a fixed amount of time to fix it. And the penetration testing is the best, depending on what compliance framework you have, or customer requirements. You typically will do that annually. Some customers go more often. I've got a few credit unions that we do testing every quarter. And it really, the framework itself is going to dictate the frequency, but personally, I think the more often the better, but it is the most costly. So down at the bottom, this is the least cost. Vulnerability scans are kind of middle of the road, and pen tests are the most expensive. They're very labor intensive. If you ever hear somebody say automated pen testing, you can realize they're actually talking about vulnerability scanning. It's just a different category, but the marketing people like to say automated pen testing is the same as pen testing. Well, it's not. True pen testing is run by a certified ethical hacker. So they're literally acting like the bad guys and finding out what the bad guys can find out and trying to get into your stuff. So we talked about automated versus manual just a little bit. Some frameworks, automated is okay. Okay, so there's other frameworks where it's not. So like you see here, PCI, FTC, CMMC level 3, you cannot use automated tools. I mean, you can use them, but they don't count for the requirement. So you instead have to still hire a certified ethical hacker. Um, at these middle levels with HIPAA and CMMC level 2, it's recommended. You may or may not, like on CMMC level 2, you may or may not pass the audit. But again, you could do the automated regularly, but once in a while you need to do the real deal. And then other ones like SOC 2 and NIST, they do not have a hard requirement. So you could use an automated tool to do that. So that's just the difference between whether you're meeting the framework's requirements versus what do we really do? Right. Some companies have to make cost trade-offs. And so if you are just a NIST CSF or ISO, you don't get the budget for the full thing, well, at least do the automated. Vulnerability management. So this is an important piece that somebody needs to be responsible for. Once you've done a scan, that's typically what everybody thinks about with vulnerability scanning, but that's only the first step. There's 5 steps. The second one is somebody, in my opinion, it should be a virtual CISO, will go through them and prioritize them based on how bad they are, whether there's bad guys using them, and what the impact is to your company. Because I've got a couple of high severity items in our office that we've just isolated them. They're just old. It's just an old printer. It's not touching the rest of our network. It can't talk to the outside. So we put it in its own little corner. Like, get in the corner, stay there, and you can't play with anybody else except for print jobs. And so that's the kind of real world experience you need to use with number 2, because you can't fix everything. There are often so many vulnerabilities found. You got to pick the ones that matter. Then you got to fix them, right? You got to pick the ones that are important, then you fix them, or you do something to compensate. Like I said, we sent that printer into its own little corner, it's a virtual LAN, but we put it in its corner. We made sure we documented, and that's it. There is no upgrade, by the way, for that printer except buy a new printer. This thing prints like 20 pages a month, so we weren't real keen on that. Retest. So once I think I fixed it, I gotta test it again. If you're doing it quarterly, then you could wait till the next quarter, for example. And then you got to document that what happened. So I found the problem. What did I do to decide to deal with it? And then I retested it. Problem gone. You got to document it. Why? Because this is what it takes to actually do vulnerability scanning is you got to manage the process. Because if you ever have a problem, the insurance company starts asking, you can just show them the documentation. All right, disaster recovery, business continuity, and incident response plans. These are three plans that most people just say, do you have a disaster recovery plan? They all feed into each other. The disaster recovery plan in simple is how do I restore my stuff? And I'll just keep it that simple. It's like, all right, something broke. How do I get it back? The business continuity, that is a different document. And it says, how do I keep my stuff working? Like how do I keep my staff? I shouldn't say stuff, sorry, staff. So like if I'm in a hospital and the EHR system goes down, how do I treat patients? Right? You need a business continuity plan for that thing, for that system that's down. And the last one is the incident response plan. I need to tell somebody when things are down. All right. So while they're restoring my stuff, I got people to tell. I got clients, I got vendors, I got, internal staff members. Maybe I got legal counsel, maybe the insurance company. Maybe I need to report it to the federal government. Depends on what it is. But there has to be a plan so that it's very black and white. And most importantly, don't keep a copy of your plan on the thing that can fail. Right? If it's a disaster recovery plan on your servers, you don't leave the plan on the server. You print it out, you take it home, you distribute it to different people. Like it's got to be accessible when that disaster happens. And in a perfect world, what we want to do is we want to test your plan every year at minimum. So we write out a plan, then we go ahead and we test it. We sit around a table, that's why they call it a tabletop, and we pretend the thing failed. If you're a mature company, we actually fail it. We go ahead and take it down. We just did that 2 weekends ago for one of our customers. Is we took their data center and we turned it off. Now what? That's the ultimate test of a plan is that they're like, okay, we got a plan. We're going to follow the plan. We're going to do the things we need to do to get back in business. We're going to communicate to people. We're going to continue being able to do their work and we're going to restore their data all simultaneously. But at minimum, you should be testing it every year just to make sure everyone remembers we have a plan. What is that plan? What's my role in the plan? All right. What's the next step? First, please don't wait for a breach. That is the worst time to figure this stuff out. Like it's too late. Don't wait for an audit because again, it's too late. We are not going to have enough time to do everything. So let's figure out what we have to deal with early. Like let's start that this week. First of all, figure out your obligations, right? I gave you all those tables showing a bunch of different frameworks based on different kinds of data. Look at those. What does your cyber insurance policy cover or require? Um, Ask people what your customers are asking for. Get copies of the vendor questionnaires. When you start putting all that together, even if you're doing this yourself, and by the way, if you bring on one of our virtual CISOs, we'll guide you through this whole process. But this is something you can start yourself. You just got to gather this data about what it is that we need to comply with. Now, once we have done that, once we know, okay, I have to comply with PCI, I have to comply with CCPA or whatever, Then you need to get an assessment, and you can pay somebody to do the assessment. You can try to do it yourself if you've got time. Most of these assessments are not necessarily hard. They're a little boring. Be true, I'm truthful about it, but it's just it's like, do you have this? Yes or no? The problem comes in with a lot of people is that they just don't know what the question's asking. So anyway, you create your posture, which will give you an idea of what you're missing. And then you start filling in the blanks, get those fundamentals in place. If you're not doing MFA 100% of the time, get that fixed. So on and so forth through the list. And the list, quote unquote, the list is defined by the framework. Then you test what you have in place. And finally, you got to remember, these are not a set it and forget it. These are an ongoing obligation. So it's got to be part of somebody's job, or maybe several somebodies spread out. People need to know what their role is ongoing. And so if you want to know more about, where you stand, BizTech is here for you. We've got the CISO team available, but you need to go through and have that conversation to really understand what your requirements are. So what you need to know, so you know what you need to do. Um, Whether you need a lot of help or you need a little help, we can do that. It's very much tailored to what your needs are. And so we've got conversations. You can connect with Mike. You can contact your account executive. However, we'll make that, get that conversation going. Um, and that is it from my side. So, is there any questions in the chat for me?
I've got no questions in the chat, but we can open it up for questions if
All
anybody has
right.
any
Yeah.
questions, comments, concerns.
Still have the same number of people, so nobody ran away screaming.
Hey, that's good. I'll take it.
Yeah. I think for a lot of people, if you don't have questions right now, let's digest this. You'll get a copy of the deck, read it, circulate it, and just get a conversation going with us. Um, Talking to Mike doesn't cost nothing. So, he's not the guy to do your compliance, but he can help answer what you need to do next. And that's usually the biggest hurdle. It's just getting started. All
Cool
right,
beans.
very good. Well, thank you, everybody. I really appreciate the time.
Yes,
Again,
thank you.
if you need anything in the future, we are here to help. And I bet you we'll do another one of these in a year, and there'll be a lot of new stuff in it because that's just the way the industry's going. So, very good.
Yep.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks, everybody. Have a
Awesome. Thanks,
great
guys.
week.
Have a good weekend.
All righty. Bye.